The Black Jacobins. Critical review. For Marxist historians, history is a dialectical mixture of transcendent, teleological determinism and revolutionary human agency. The Black Jacobins, Toussaint Louverture, and the San Domingo Revolution, by Trinidadian Trotskyite historian CLR James, 1901 to 1989, mirrors this ideological structure. Written in 1938 and published in 1962, The Black Jacobins is a mixture of historical retrospective and call to revolutionary action. James surveys the birth of the Haitian state through a Marxist-Leninist Trotskyite lens, seeing the birth of Haiti as a result of the inevitable, the liberation of the most brutally oppressed, in this case, San Domingo, colonial Haiti, slaves. However, James's narrative of Haitian slave revolt is designed to spark Soviet-style revolutions in countries laboring under the yoke of Western colonial oppression. James, therefore, heavily emphasizes the need for human action to catalyze historical progression. The merger of Leninist revolutionary apologetics with the subject matter of Jacobinism, both as a historical phenomenon and as an ideology, causes James to dismiss the human cost of revolutionary terror. Ironically, James, a Trotskyite revolutionary, seems oblivious to the fact that the Jacobinite revolutionary model, much like the Stalinist purge, not only devours its enemies, but cannibalizes its own. A thorough history told with poetic prose but a lack of analytical humanitarian empathy, The Black Jacobins is a valuable piece of scholarship for those interested in Haitian history or those interested in Western Leninist historiography. James's work serves three main functions. First, James tells the story of the Haitian Revolution in the manner of a grand top-down narrative, which is sympathetic to the revolutionary masses at every turn. Secondly, James writes apologetically for the cause of revolutionary upheaval. Finally, James seeks to inspire Marxist-Leninist revolutions in the colonial world. At the time The Black Jacobins was written in 1938, African colonial liberation was at the forefront of James's thought. 8. However, since The Black Jacobins was published in 1962, James addresses Fidel Castro, the fledgling Cuban state and the West Indies, with staunch Leninist solidarity in his added appendix, 392. James's work is also structured around the Soviet idea of simultaneous revolution of the bourgeoisie against monarchy and the proletariat against the revolting bourgeois. Despite James's ideological framework, non-Marxists have praised James for his methodology, documentation, and prose. James's audience is given a richly detailed chronological narrative of the Haitian Revolution and the geopolitical realities of the late 1700s. One is exposed not only to the events of the Haitian Revolution, but also to James's understanding of why these events took place. James utilizes a combination of correspondence, diaries, archival records, and secondary studies dealing with the various actors in the Haitian Revolution. The New York Times praised James by stating that his detailed, richly documented, and dramatically written book holds a deep and lasting interest. James frames his narrative of the Haitian Revolution in Marxist-Leninist categories of class and revolutionary strategy. In the context of 18th century Haiti, there was no proletariat or bourgeoisie to play the role of protagonist and antagonist for James's Marxist narrative. James addresses this problem via the Soviet concept of pre-industrial class surrogates to act as analogs for the conventional actors in a Marxist dialectical progression. For example, James uses white slave owners to serve as the bourgeois surrogate, mulattoes, poor whites, and free blacks to act as a middle-class surrogate, and finally black Haitian slaves to play the surrogate proletariat with Toussaint as its vanguard. In describing these surrogates, James makes clear the brutality of the slaveholders, the need for the slaves to take extreme measures to overthrow their masters, and the necessity for those caught in the middle of this conflict to pick a side or get swept up in the revolutionary current. To describe the brutality of the slave owners, James frequently cites the physical and psychological abuse endured by the slaves at the hands of their masters. James mentions gunpowder being put in slaves' anuses and other forms of severe physical torture, mutilation, and death to illustrate his view that there is no need to shed one tear or drop of ink regarding violence perpetrated against this class, 373. James's description of the Haitian middle class focuses largely on how mulatto, free black, and poor whites searched for power and purpose in a context in which they had neither the political power of the slave owners nor the revolutionary ascendancy of the rebelling slaves. For James, alienation caused this middle class to have their political views clouded with jealousy, resentment, and uncertainty. For example, James cites the fact that numerous mulattoes and freed blacks were appointed to many of the most important political and military posts of Toussaint's revolutionary Haiti, 164. However, James continues by stating, mulattoes and former free blacks of Le Cap could not bear to see any ex-slave do well in business or hold any position, 166. Despite this antagonistic nature of James's surrogate proletariat, James largely views his Haitian middle class sympathetically, as seen in his regret that the massacre of white Haitians late in the Revolution had adverse effects on the well-being and prosperity of Haitian blacks and mulattoes, 373-74. In James's description of his proletarian surrogate, the Haitian slaves, he emphasizes their revolutionary consciousness, native culture, and dialectical adaptability. For example, James cites the slaves' merger of voodoo ceremony and aspirations of radical liberation. He quotes one slave song and dance, "We swear to destroy the whites and all that they possess. Let us die rather than fail to keep this vow." 18. James likens this to how the Jews in Babylon sang of Zion, and the Bantu today, the 8, sing in secret the national anthem of Africa, 18. To emphasize the dialectical nature of the Haitian slaves, James highlights the early life of the slaves' leader Toussaint, whose family master was ironically not cruel, but nurtured the intellect of Toussaint's father, and Toussaint by extension. James therefore sees Toussaint's natural genius, stemming not only from Toussaint, but from exceptional parents, friends, and kind master. 20. This scenario lends itself to the Marxist maxim of the bourgeoisie producing its own gravediggers. In essence, this concept means that the oppressed utilize the tools of the ruling class to deconstruct ruling class's hegemony and reconstruct a system that represents the hegemony of the oppressed. James goes on later in his work to show the political savvy of Toussaint and his black Jacobins as they are able to align themselves pragmatically with various colonial powers to further their own ideals and interests. Thus, James places Haiti in a global imperial context, instead of as an isolated phenomenon. In terms of revolutionary strategy, James writes enthusiastically on the side of revolutionary terror, seeing it as a legitimate and necessary tool in building a brighter future and preventing counter-revolutionary action on the part of the former elite. Simply put, James's lack of humanitarian consideration lends itself to analytical hypocrisy. This occurs within the black Jacobins, but transcends his monograph to apply to the Bolshevik experience in general. For example, James spends the first 152 pages of his monograph advocating the mass-based revolutionary upheaval that occurred during the Haitian Revolution. However, when mass unrest turns away from James's antagonists, the slave owners, and towards his protagonist surrogate for Lenin, Toussaint, James's narrative shifts tone, and he refers to the Haitian slaves as lacking civic discipline and running wild, 152. Here, James faces a fundamental problem in simultaneously trying to be apologetic to mob rule and authoritarian dictatorship. The result is an occasionally confused narrative that contradicts itself. James's tone at times calls for anarchistic violence, but at other times submission to the will of a leader. James's enthusiasm for Jacobinism is highly ironic, considering the fact that as Jacobinism cannibalized its own leaders, Bolshevism, in its Stalinist mode, did precisely the same to Soviet state founders. Furthermore, many Western Marxists, like James, were feeling the icy wrath of the Soviet state in Siberian gulags precisely at the time James was writing The Black Jacobins in 1938. The irony of James's endorsement of Jacobinism is further compounded by the fact that, as Robespierre was felled by the guillotine, which he made notorious, James's theoretical leader, Trotsky, was killed by a Soviet assassin 2 years after James completed The Black Jacobins. Furthermore, James's desire to communicate to his readers the brutality of the ruling elites causes James to make historical speculations. Most notably, this occurs when he speculates what the elite might do to their enemies if they had the chance. For example, when discussing the dynamics of the French Revolution, James states that French monarchy would guillotine them all if it came back, 177. James does not back this claim. He simply states it as if it were a fact. CLR James's The Black Jacobins provides a richly detailed, documented, and critically revered account of the Haitian Revolution. His is a history that seeks to impact the present and shape the future by understanding the past. James uses the Leninist categories in his mind to present a vivid picture of 17th century Haiti. However, James does a disservice to Marxist theory and Marxist theorists through his sympathy for revolutionary terror. This is not simply since his view projects a disregard for human life onto Marxist thought, but also because he is unable to appreciate the misery that revolution can bring if its vanguards and its enemies reject elementary morality. In a 1981 interview, CLR James stated that he believed in the Marxist maxim, socialism or barbarism, viewing that the rule of the people must triumph over brutal oppression. It is important to note in the dialectical progression towards human and historical emancipation, socialism must remain distinct from barbarism, lest it be devoured by despair, fanaticism, and paranoia. A lesson learned by Robespierre and Trotsky at the cost of their heads.